Hi, my name is Dr. Jennifer Green, and in this video, which is part of a bigger series on writing course objectives, this one is specific to the actual writing of objectives, whether CILOs or PILOs. So we often start with the big, students will be able to kind of at the top of the page or the top of your list of objectives, and then each specific objective just starts with a verb. The general format, and of course there's always some variation, but the general format is an action verb followed by a noun, and then potentially some more information about the condition or the time scale or something like that. So analyze, our verb, AC circuits, that's what it is we are analyzing, and how, using MATLAB and multiism. Solve, that's our verb. What are we solving? Complex problems? Tell me more. How? Collaboratively. In small groups, in a team. Right? There's lots of ways to phrase the same thing. Compare, that's our verb. What are we comparing? Theoretical frameworks that guide current research. Excellent. Now that's just the verb and the noun. You don't always have to have condition and extra information, especially in CILOs. Now, if you remember, or if you go back, or you have watched the videos on PILOs, those are usually a little bigger, a little meatier, because they're talking about these final outcomes for the program. And so you can, if you noticed the ones that are given by ABET, there's actually a lot of conditional or other information that is shared. Whether we're talking about program outcomes or course outcomes or objectives, we really want to stay between 4 and 8 if possible. Those are the ideals. It's easier to make sure we can assess all of those, and it's easier when you go to do the matrix mapping, where you're mapping on your course objectives onto your program outcomes. So we want to make sure that 4 to 8 number is followed most of the time. Again, you may have reasons to have more, but it's best to keep it in that range. So Bloom's taxonomy is probably known to most of you. It's the idea of different levels of understanding, different levels of knowledge. And it's been reworked several times. And in this case, we have 2 different dimensions. The first one is the knowledge dimension. And this classifies 4 types of knowledge that learners may be expected to acquire or construct. So if we think about concrete knowledge, that's like the factual knowledge, the definitions, that kind of thing. Then we move to conceptual knowledge, like you can kind of understand the idea. Procedural knowledge, like you can do it. And metacognitive, knowing about the tasks, including like when and where to use it, and self-knowledge. And so it says down here, metacognitive knowledge is a special case. So, and you can read through Anderson and Crethwell a little bit more about that. But that's one way to think about knowledge. The second is the cognitive process. And this probably looks more familiar to you if you've looked up Bloom's taxonomy verb lists. It looks a lot like this. And this dimension represents a continuum of increasing cognitive complexity, from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. Now, I will say that different people put different verbs, different ideas in different lists. Even Bloom's, the verbs, the big verbs like remember, understand, apply, have been changed over time. So there's not necessarily one right version of these. So I'm just going to share this one and one more with you, but you can go online and find many others as well to help you find the verbs that speak to what it is you are wanting your students to be able to understand, which thinking skills. So we can see that remember has to do with recognizing and recalling. Analyze has to do with differentiating, and there's some subverbs. Organizing, attributing, right? So different ways. And then what these authors have done is they put them together in this model where we have the knowledge dimension here and the cognitive process dimension here. So remembering is on the lower cognitive continuum, and factual is at the lower end of the knowledge. That's where you can list things like primary and secondary colors, or you can list the different parts of speech. I teach a grammar class, right? You can list things from whatever subject area you teach. A little bit higher is recognizing, then recalling, then identifying. So even in remembering, there's the easier ones and the harder ones, or the more complex, the more cognitively complex. And then the more deeper the knowledge, I should say. This is the cognitive complexity. And factual in the same way, like listing, summarizing, responding, selecting, checking, and generating can all be thought about like at that basic factual level. But at the metacognitive, all along this, you identify, predict, use, deconstruct, reflect, create. So this is another way of thinking about how a learning objective that generally corresponds with each of the various combinations of cognitive and knowledge. So again, they're learning objectives, not activities. So students will be able to clarify assembly instructions or something on that order. It's also nice, frankly, just to have a big list of verbs when you are writing your objectives. So we have, again, see, notice these have different titles from the previous slide. But in general, we have lower order thinking, higher order thinking. It's on a continuum. They can kind of blend. You look at different lists, you'll find some different verbs. The verbs you will not find on here are understand and know. Do not use understand or know in your objectives or outcomes. Go through your objectives and your outcomes. If you see the word understand or know, cross it out. Get rid of it. Find a new verb. Yes, we want our students to understand things. We want them to know things. The problem is you cannot measure those verbs. So what does it mean to know something? What does it mean to understand something? How are you going to measure that? And again, if you think back to this idea of knowledge, right? Factual knowledge, if they know their primary colors, or they know their parts of speech, or they know the major components of a circuit, okay, so they know that. That doesn't mean they have higher knowledge. So knowing is an abstract idea. So if you want them to be able to identify the parts of a circuit, that's your verb. How are you assessing your students? How are you measuring their understanding? How are you measuring if they know something? That's where you're going to find your verb. So if you want them to arrange things, if you want them to be able to describe how a circuit works, if you want them to categorize different types of circuits to show that they understand the difference, but they're categorizing because they can explain, which is another verb, how this circuit is different from this circuit. That will show you their understanding. But they're doing that by categorizing because that you can measure. Okay, so we need to get rid of understanding and know. Those are the two easiest verbs to go to immediately when writing objectives. But they gotta go. Okay, so think about your verbs. Think about the noun that the verb is doing and any other context that is beneficial.